The sickening thud of flesh against metal lockers echoed through Jefferson Middle School's hallway like a gunshot. Danny Chen's chubby body crumpled against the cold steel, his backpack spilling textbooks across the polished linoleum floor. The morning assembly had just ended, and students were flowing through the corridors like water through a dam. But now they froze. Every conversation died. Every footstep stopped. HOA Martinez stood over the fallen boy, her designer sneakers planted wide, her manicured nails still tingling from the force of the shove. At 17, she commanded attention wherever she went, not through kindness or achievement, but through the raw, magnetic pull of cruelty. Her jet-black hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, and her clothes carried the unmistakable sheen of money. But it was her eyes that truly unsettled people. Dark, calculating, always searching for weakness. "Get up, you pathetic whale," she hissed, her voice cutting through the sudden silence like a blade. "Did I give you permission to breathe my air?" Danny struggled to his knees, his round face flushed with embarrassment and pain. At 10 years old, he was already carrying the weight of adult-sized problems, literally and figuratively. His school uniform strained against his soft belly, and his thick-rimmed glasses sat crooked on his nose from the impact. Tears threatened at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them back with the practiced desperation of someone who had learned that showing weakness only made things worse. "I wasn't doing anything," he whispered, reaching for his scattered books with trembling hands. "I was just walking to class." The crowd of students pressed closer, forming a loose circle around the scene. Some held up phones, already recording. Others whispered among themselves, their voices creating a low buzz of excitement and horror. But none moved to help. They all knew better than to cross HOA Martinez. HOA's laugh was sharp and humorless. She stepped closer, her shadow falling across Danny's hunched form. "Walking, is that what you call that pathetic waddle?" She mimicked his gait with exaggerated movements, swaying her hips and bouncing with cruel precision. "More like a penguin having a seizure." The crowd erupted in nervous laughter. Some students covered their mouths, ashamed of their amusement, but unable to resist the social pressure. Others laughed openly, feeding off the toxic energy that HOA radiated like heat from a furnace. Danny's shoulders shook as he continued gathering his belongings. His math textbook had fallen open, revealing pages of neat homework, all completed, all correct. He was a good student, a quiet student, the kind who never caused trouble and always said please and thank you. But in HOA's world, those qualities weren't virtues. They were targets painted on his back. "You know what your problem is." "Danny," HOA crouched down, bringing her face level with his. Her voice dropped to a theatrical whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hallway. "You think you belong here. You think you deserve to share the same space as real people." She reached out and flicked his glasses, sending them tumbling to the floor. The world blurred for Danny, transforming the hostile faces around him into indistinct smears of color and shadow. He fumbled blindly for his glasses, his hands patting the cold linoleum with increasing desperation. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "I need those to see." "Oh, you need them." HOA picked up the glasses, holding them just out of his reach. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to disgust everyone with your presence." She dangled the glasses above his head, watching as he stretched upward with pathetic eagerness. Then, with deliberate slowness, she let them slip from her fingers. They clattered to the floor, and she stepped forward, placing her heel directly over the frame. "Oops," she said, grinding her foot down. The crack of breaking plastic was obscenely loud in the hushed hallway. "Butterfingers." Danny stared at the ruined glasses, his vision swimming with tears he could no longer hold back. Those glasses had cost his family $300 money they could barely afford. Scraped together from his mother's overtime shifts at the hospital and his father's weekend security work. Now they were nothing but twisted metal and shattered glass, destroyed in an instant by someone who probably spent more on lunch than his family spent on groceries. Why? The word escaped him as barely more than a breath. But Hoa heard it. She always heard weakness. Why? She laughed again, louder this time. Because I can. Because you're nothing. Because looking at you makes me sick. And I shouldn't have to tolerate things that make me sick. The hallway had filled with more students now, drawn by the commotion like moths to a flame. Teachers were nowhere to be seen. They were all in the faculty lounge, enjoying their brief respite between the morning assembly and first period. The administration building was too far away to hear the disturbance. For these crucial minutes, Hoa owned this space completely. She grabbed Danny by the collar of his shirt, hauling him to his feet with surprising strength. He was heavy, but adrenaline and malice gave her leverage. "You want to know a secret?" she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. "My father owns half the businesses in this town. My mother sits on the school board. Do you know what that means?" Danny shook his head, too frightened to speak. "It means I'm untouchable. It means I can do whatever I want to, whoever I want. And there's nothing anyone can do about it." Her grip tightened on his shirt, bunching the fabric at his throat. "It means you're going to suffer, and no one's going to save you." The crowd pressed closer, phones held high, capturing every moment of Danny's humiliation. Social media feeds would be flooded within minutes, the fat kid getting what he deserved, the queen bee asserting her dominance. Another day in the brutal hierarchy of adolescent power. "Now," Hoa said, releasing his shirt with a sharp push that sent him stumbling backward. "I want you to do something for me. I want you to get down on your hands and knees and crawl to the end of the hallway, like the animal you are." The suggestion hung in the air like poison gas. Even some of the students who had been laughing before fell silent, recognizing that they were witnessing something that crossed lines most people didn't even know existed. "I won't," Danny said, his voice stronger than anyone expected. "I won't do that." The defiance in his tone seemed to surprise everyone, including himself. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, not just hurt or fear, but anger. Real, burning anger at the injustice of it all, at the casual cruelty, at the way everyone just stood and watched like he was entertainment rather than a human being. Hoa's expression darkened. She wasn't used to resistance, especially not from someone she considered so far beneath her. The challenge to her authority was intolerable, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of invincibility that she wore like armor. "Excuse me." Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Did you just tell me no?" Before Danny could respond, she struck. Her palm connected with his cheek in a slap that resonated through the hallway like a whip crack. His head snapped to the side, and when he turned back, a bright red handprint was already blooming across his pale skin. "There," she said, flexing her fingers with satisfaction. "That's better. Now you remember who you're talking to." But Danny didn't crumble. Instead, something extraordinary happened. He straightened his shoulders, wiped the tears from his eyes, and looked directly at her, really looked, with a steady gaze that seemed to see straight through her designer clothes and perfect makeup to something rotten underneath. "My name," he said clearly, his voice carrying further than it ever had before, "is Daniel Chen, not whale, not animal, not thing, Daniel Chen. And I have as much right to be here as you do." The words landed like physical blows. Hoa actually took a step backward, her perfectly composed expression flickering for just an instant. In that moment, she looked less like a queen and more like what she really was, a scared, angry teenager who had learned to hurt others before they could hurt her. But the vulnerability lasted only a heartbeat. Her mask slipped back into place, harder and more vicious than before. Rights. She laughed. But there was something forced about it now. You think you have rights? Let me show you exactly what your rights are worth. She lunged forward, grabbing Danny by the shoulders and digging her nails deep into his flesh, even through his shirt. The pressure was excruciating. He gasped and tried to pull away, but her grip was iron strong, fueled by rage and desperation to reassert her dominance. You belong on the ground, she snarled, pressing down with all her weight. You belong under my feet, where garbage belongs. Danny's knees began to buckle under the combined pressure of her hands and his own exhaustion. The day had started badly and was only getting worse. He hadn't eaten breakfast because there wasn't time. His mother had worked a double shift and overslept, leaving him to get himself ready and walk to school. His stomach churned with hunger and stress, and the fluorescent lights overhead seemed too bright, too harsh, making everything feel surreal and nightmarish. Just as his legs were about to give out completely, footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway, heavy, purposeful footsteps that cut through the buzz of teenage voices like a knife through butter. The crowd began to shift nervously, heads turning toward the sound. What's going on here? The voice was deep, authoritative, and familiar to anyone who lived in their small town. Chief Michael Chen, Danny's father, stood at the entrance to the hallway, his police uniform crisp and intimidating. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and solid, with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. Behind him, moving with the same purposeful stride, was Mayor Linda Chen, Danny's mother, in her professional business suit, her mayoral pin glinting under the fluorescent lights. The hallway went dead silent. Phones disappeared into pockets and backpacks. Students who had been eagerly recording the confrontation suddenly found fascination in their shoes. The ceiling, anywhere but the scene unfolding before them. Hoa's hands fell away from Danny's shoulders as if she'd been electrocuted. Her face went from flushed with anger to pale with shock in the span of a heartbeat. She recognized both adults. Everyone in town did, but she had never connected them to the quiet, overweight boy she'd been tormenting. Danny. Mayor Chen's voice was soft, but carried the weight of authority that came from years of public service. Are you hurt? Danny looked up at his parents. His vision still blurred from his broken glasses, but their faces familiar enough that he could make them out clearly. Relief washed over him like warm water, followed immediately by embarrassment. He didn't want them to see him like this, weak, crying, unable to defend himself against a 17-year-old girl. I'm okay, he whispered, but the red handprint on his cheek and the claw marks on his shoulders told a different story. Chief Chen's gaze swept the hallway, taking in the scattered remains of Danny's glasses, the crowd of guilty-looking students, and finally settling on Hoa. She stood frozen in place, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. Miss Martinez, he said, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. I think we need to have a conversation. Hua's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time in her life, her family's influence felt inadequate to protect her. She was facing not just any adults, but the two most powerful people in their small town, and she had just been caught red-handed, abusing their child. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered, her usual eloquence deserting her completely. We were just playing. Kids being kids. You know, Mayor Chen knelt beside her son, carefully examining the damage to his glasses and the marks on his face and shoulders. When she spoke, her voice was deadly calm. Playing. She held up the twisted remains of the glasses. This is playing. The mayor stood slowly, her professional composure intact, but her eyes blazing with maternal fury. Ms. Martinez, I believe you're familiar with the concept of assault and battery. As mayor, I've had to sign off on enough court cases to know what it looks like. HOA's legs felt weak beneath her. The hallway, which had felt like her kingdom just minutes before, now felt like a trap closing around her. Students who had been her eager audience were melting away, suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. You can't, she started, then stopped. What could she say that her parents would protect her? Her father's business influence seemed suddenly insignificant when facing the mayor and police chief. Her mother's position on the school board was nothing compared to the authority standing before her. Chief Chen pulled out his radio. Dispatch, this is Chief Chen. I need a unit at Jefferson Middle School for a potential juvenile assault case. No. HOA's composure finally cracked completely. You can't arrest me. I'm 17. My parents will sue. This is entrapment or something. Entrapment. Mayor Chen's eyebrows rose. You seem to misunderstand the situation. Miss Martinez, entrapment is when law enforcement induces someone to commit a crime they wouldn't otherwise commit. What we witnessed was you assaulting our son of your own free will. The radio crackled to life. Unit 23 responding to Jefferson Middle School. ETA 3 minutes. 3 minutes. HOA's mind raced, calculating options, looking for escape routes, but there were none. Too many witnesses, too much evidence, too much authority arrayed against her. Please, she said, her voice smaller than anyone had ever heard it. I'm sorry. I didn't know he was your son. I didn't mean... You didn't mean to assault him. Chief Chen's voice was ice cold. Or you didn't mean to get caught. The distinction hung in the air like a blade. HOA opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. What could she say? That she was sorry. She wasn't, not really. She was sorry she'd been caught. Sorry her victims turned out to have powerful parents. Sorry her actions were going to have consequences for once in her privileged life. But she wasn't sorry for hurting Danny. The only thing she regretted was that she hadn't hurt him more before his parents arrived. The sound of approaching sirens began to filter through the school's walls. Students who had lingered were now fleeing in earnest, not wanting to be caught in the aftermath of what was clearly going to be a serious legal situation. Mayor Chen helped Danny to his feet, her touch gentle, but her expression stern. Can you tell us exactly what happened, sweetheart? Danny looked around the nearly empty hallway, then at HOA, who was staring at him with a mixture of hatred and desperation. Part of him, the part that had been trained by years of bullying to minimize conflict, wanted to say it wasn't that bad, that maybe they could just forget about it. But another part of him, the part that had found its voice just moments before, refused to let her off the hook. Too many kids like him suffered in silence. Too many bullies got away with their cruelty because their victims were too scared or too ashamed to speak up. She pushed me into the lockers, he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. She called me names. She broke my glasses on purpose. She slapped me and dug her nails into my shoulders. She tried to make me crawl on the ground like an animal. Each accusation hit HOA like a physical blow. She could see her future unraveling college applications, scholarships, her carefully planned trajectory toward inheriting her father's business empire. All of it crumbling because she couldn't control her need to hurt someone weaker than herself. That's not... "I didn't," she started. But the evidence was written all over Danny's body. The handprint on his cheek was already darkening to a bruise. The scratches on his shoulders were visible through his torn shirt. The broken glasses lay in pieces at her feet like an accusation. Two police officers appeared at the end of the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. They approached with the practiced calm of professionals who had seen too much human cruelty to be surprised by anything. "Chief," the older officer said, nodding respectfully, "what's the situation?" "Assault of a minor," Chief Chen replied. "Multiple witnesses, physical evidence, victim's testimony. I need this handled by the book, no special treatment, because of family connections." The officers moved toward HOA, who backed against the lockers as if she could somehow disappear into the metal. "HOA Martinez," the younger officer said, "you're under arrest for assault. You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda rights echoed through the hallway like a funeral dirge. As the handcuffs clicked around HOA's wrists, she finally began to understand the magnitude of what she had done. This wasn't going to be smoothed over by her parents' money or influence. This was real. "My parents will have you all fired," she said. But the threat sounded hollow even to her own ears. "You can't do this to me. I'm somebody important." Mayor Chen stepped forward, her voice carrying the full weight of her office. "Miss Martinez, let me explain something to you. Importance isn't inherited. It's earned. And what you've shown us today is that despite all your advantages, all your privileges, you've chosen to use them to hurt others. That doesn't make you important. It makes you pathetic." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. HOA had built her entire identity around being better than everyone else, superior by virtue of her family's wealth and status. But standing there in handcuffs, being led away by police officers while her victim's parents watched with disgusted disappointment, she felt smaller than she ever had in her life. As the officers escorted her toward the school's exit, students peeked out from classrooms and around corners, whispering among themselves. The story would spread like wildfire, the untouchable queen bee brought down by her own cruelty. The quiet fat kid who turned out to be the mayor's son. The dramatic confrontation that ended with handcuffs and arrest. But it wasn't over yet. The legal system would need to run its course, and HOA's family would undoubtedly fight back with everything they had. Money could buy lawyers, and lawyers could sometimes work miracles. The Martinez family wasn't going to go down without a fight. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. News of the arrest had spread beyond the school, beyond the town, picked up by regional media as a story about privilege, bullying, and justice. HOA sat at the defendant's table in a conservative dress that made her look younger and more innocent than she was. Her lawyer, one of the most expensive in the state, whispering last-minute strategy in her ear. Across the aisle, Danny sat with his parents, wearing new glasses and a suit that made him look older and more serious. The scratches on his shoulders had healed, but the emotional scars were still fresh. He had nightmares now, dreams where he was trapped in that hallway forever, surrounded by laughing faces and cameras, unable to escape. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Williams, had built her case methodically. Security footage from the school's cameras, testimony from witnesses, medical documentation of Danny's injuries, expert testimony about the psychological impact of bullying. She had painted a picture of systematic abuse, deliberate cruelty, and callous disregard for another human being's dignity. HOA's lawyer, meanwhile, had crafted a narrative of teenage drama blown out of proportion, adolescent conflicts that didn't rise to the level of criminal behavior, a promising young woman whose future was being destroyed by vindictive parents using their political power for personal revenge. But the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage was particularly damning, It showed everything in stark black and white. From the initial shove to the broken glasses, to the slap that left its mark on Danny's face. There was no ambiguity. No room for alternative interpretations. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, HOA's carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely. She sobbed openly in the courtroom, her designer dress wrinkled, her perfect makeup streaked with tears. For the first time in her life, she was facing real consequences for her actions. The judge, an elderly woman with kind eyes and steel in her voice, looked down at the defendant with something that might have been pity. "Miss Martinez," she said, "I've seen a lot of young people come through this courtroom. Some of them made mistakes they deeply regretted. Some of them were victims of circumstances beyond their control. But you chose cruelty. You chose to use your advantages to hurt someone who couldn't fight back. That speaks to a fundamental failure of character that can't be excused by youth or privilege." The sentence was harsh, but fair. 6 months in juvenile detention, 2 years of probation, mandatory anger management and empathy counseling, 500 hours of community service working with vulnerable populations, and full restitution for Danny's medical expenses and damaged property. But perhaps more damaging than the legal consequences were the social ones. Video of the arrest had gone viral, shared millions of times across social media platforms. HOA Martinez had become the face of privileged cruelty, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and casual abuse. Her father's business suffered boycotts and protests. Her mother was forced to resign from the school board in disgrace. College acceptance letters were rescinded. The carefully constructed edifice of their family's reputation crumbled in a matter of weeks. Danny, meanwhile, found himself in an unexpected position. The quiet, bullied kid had become something of a folk hero, the underdog who stood up to power and won. Speaking invitations poured in from schools and community groups. A scholarship fund was established in his name for other bullying victims. But fame wasn't what he wanted. What he wanted was simpler and more profound: the knowledge that what happened to him wouldn't happen to other kids. That bullies like HOA couldn't hide behind their family's wealth and influence forever. That someone was watching. Someone cared. Someone would step in when needed. 6 months later, as autumn painted the leaves gold and red, Danny walked through the same hallway where it all began. He was taller now, more confident, surrounded by friends who genuinely liked him rather than feared him. The broken glasses had been replaced with contacts, and he'd lost some weight thanks to joining the debate team and swimming club. But more than his physical appearance had changed. There was something different in his eyes now, a quiet strength that came from surviving the worst and coming out stronger. He had learned that he was worth defending, worth protecting, worth standing up for. The hallway itself looked the same, but it felt different. Other students looked at him with respect now, not pity. Teachers made sure to check in with him regularly. The administration had implemented new anti-bullying policies with real teeth, real consequences. HOA was gone, serving her sentence in a juvenile facility 3 counties away. Her friends had scattered, no longer bound together by fear and toxic loyalty. The power structure that had allowed her to terrorize others had collapsed completely. In its place, something healthier was growing. Students looked out for each other more. Teachers paid closer attention to warning signs. Parents got more involved. The school had become a safer place for vulnerable kids, not perfect, but better. That evening, as Danny sat at the dinner table with his parents, he reflected on how much had changed. His mother was still the mayor, still fighting for their small town's future. His father was still the police chief, still protecting their community from harm. But now, they were also symbols of something more: proof that justice could prevail, that the powerful could be held accountable, that someone was always watching out for the vulnerable. "How was school today?" his mother asked. The same question she'd asked 1,000 times before. "Good," Danny replied, and meant it. Really good. Outside their window, the sun was setting over their small town, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was the same sky that had watched over Hoa's reign of terror, the same sky that had witnessed her downfall. But somehow, it looked different, now brighter, more hopeful, full of promise for better days ahead. In homes across town, other families were sitting down to dinner. Other parents were asking about their children's days. Other kids were learning that they mattered, that they were worth protecting, that justice, though sometimes slow, was real. The story of what happened in that hallway had become more than just a cautionary tale about bullying. It had become a reminder that power without compassion was empty, that privilege without responsibility was meaningless, and that sometimes the smallest voices could speak the loudest truths. And in a juvenile detention facility, 3 counties away, a 17-year-old girl stared at her reflection in a small, scratched mirror and began, perhaps for the first time in her life, to truly understand what she had lost, not just her freedom or her reputation, but her chance to be someone worth knowing, someone worth respecting, someone who used her advantages to lift others up rather than tear them down. The road to redemption was long and uncertain, paved with genuine remorse and sustained effort to change. But it existed, and someday, if she chose to walk it, she might find her way to becoming the person she should have been all along. For now, though, justice had been served, the vulnerable had been protected, and a small town had learned that no one, no matter how wealthy, how connected, how seemingly untouchable, was above the law or beyond the reach of consequences. In the end, that was the most important lesson of all, that every action has consequences. Every choice matters, and every person, regardless of age, size, or social status, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. It was a lesson written in broken glasses and healing bruises, in handcuffs and court records, in changed lives and transformed communities. And it was a lesson that would echo through the halls of Jefferson Middle School for years to come. A reminder that somewhere, someone was always watching, always ready to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. The story ended where it began, in a school hallway. But this time, it was filled with laughter instead of tears, with friendship instead of fear, with hope instead of despair. This time, the vulnerable were protected, the bullies were held accountable, and justice, imperfect but real, had prevailed. And sometimes, in a world that often seemed dark and unfair, that was enough. That was everything.